Oh man, you were really enjoying that new tea I got.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's pretty good. Is it a new blend or
yeah, it's a Russian blend. Got it shipped in the other day.
chamomile?
No, polonium.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
hey, it's pretty good.
yeah.
Mind if I have a second cup?
Oh yeah, yeah. Just finished that first one.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mm.
delicious. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, what's up? Welcome to another episode of the Sons of History podcast. I'm Dustin Bass.
And I'm Alan Joaquin.
Yes, you are. How you
Let's
feeling?
let's yeah, let's move this one along because I'm kind of feeling a little woozy, but
Yeah. It's
I don't
probably just
know.
some stomach bleeding.
Yeah,
That's fine.
something I ate. I
It's
think.
some strong tea. I'm not gonna. It'll keep you up for nights.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
it'll give me that
It'll
get up and go.
Yeah.
Like I gotta get up and go to the
You will
bathroom.
definitely get up and go.
Yeah.
And if you're saved, you'll be going to see our good Lord and Savior. All right. Well, we've got a great episode for you. I'm excited to have this conversation. I always look forward to the conversations about some of the worst people in world history, and this one is going to be about Stalin. In at least a bulk of the conversation. Do you like having conversations like that, or do you prefer like, hey, can we talk about maybe Winston Churchill or your favorite FDR or Woodrow Wilson?
Well, yeah, I do kind of like talking about Stalin because nobody else does. We were just sitting and thinking, are there any movies
Yeah,
really that show Stalin in a bad light or the Soviets?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there are.
There are,
I can't
but
think of
there's
any.
not a
Well,
lot of them.
There's Red Dawn,
Yeah,
but and I'm surprised that one was even made.
and remade.
Yeah, and remade. Although
Yeah,
that was North Korea that attacked in
yeah.
the second one, but yeah, I mean they didn't want to make the Russians look bad, I guess.
I guess I don't know, or maybe that just there's such communism in Hollywood they don't want to make communists look bad. It's a wild time that we're living in. But Mr. Jones, that was a book that put Stalin in a bad light. That came out I think about 2 years ago. Very good movie. If you've never seen that one, I know this is not book and movie recommendation, but since you had mentioned that one was actually a really good movie, and it talks about the Ukraine famine and everything. So yeah,
Okay, well, I might have to
quite
watch that.
quite good. Definitely worth the
Well,
watch. All
and
right.
we can't really talk about the book and movie yet, but we can talk about what happened this week in history. All right, for me, since we're going to be talking about Stalin in this episode,
Mm-hmm.
I thought this would be a good time to talk about the what was known as the Katyn massacre. Um, what happened? You have to go back just a couple of years. That everybody knows that Germany invaded Poland in 1939 on September the 1st. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Soviets also invaded Poland, and that happened on September 17th, one day after they finalized their agreements with the war with Japan. There was kind of an undeclared war with Japan, but September 17th, the Soviets moved in and they took over eastern Poland. Now, about 2 years later, in June of 1941, June 22nd, 1941, the uh, Soviets were invaded by Germany. The Germans, they signed a non-aggression pact, but they invaded the Soviets, stabbed them in the back, and it took a couple of years, but on April the 13th of 1943, there was a mass grave found in the Katyn Forest, which is near Smolensk, which I believe today is in Belarus. There were about a little over 4,400 bodies found in a mass grave. And now the Germans brought in the International Red Cross, and what they discovered is that these were, Polish civilians and military, the intelligentsia military officers who were murdered, and they were buried in a mass grave. Now that was kind of a bit of a problem because back after 1941, the Soviet Union and the Polish government in exile in London were on the same side. They were supposed to be allies. And the Polish, after the Germans attacked the Soviet Union,
Mm-hmm.
the Poles said, "Hey, now to the Soviets, hey, now that we're friends, all those prisoners of war you captured in '39, can we have them back?" maybe we can fight
Yeah.
with you. And the Soviets were like, well, all those guys, they escaped, to China and,
Yeah.
yeah, so,
Uh-huh.
or Ukraine or wherever it
Mm-hmm.
was that they actually, no, that I think it was in
Yeah.
China they said that they had escaped to. So we don't
Yeah.
have them.
In an
Well,
underground tunnel.
yeah. So, well, it turns out that now they assume there's a prediction that a lot more than 4,400 were killed there.
Mm-hmm.
They estimate somewhere between 20 to 22,000 Poles
Yeesh.
were murdered by the Soviet Union. A lot of it because these guys were not going to be communist.
Mm-hmm.
They figured, you know what, if Poland is ever given a regular government again, we can't have these non-communists alive. We need to fill the government up with the communists. And the Polish government of exile and the Soviet Union broke diplomatic relations shortly after that.
Well,
And the Soviets were like, okay, we're going to have our own Polish government. And they did, and that's how they ended up becoming communist
yeah.
after they took over.
Crazy.
So that happened April 13, 1943.
Oh, speaking of April 13th, I've got one just a couple of days before that, but also April 13th, too. April 11th, 1814, my good old buddy Napoleon Bonaparte is involved. This is the Treaty of Fontainebleau.
Fontainebleau?
Yeah, something like that. The Treaty of Fontainebleau is signed on April 11th, 1814. This brings the hostilities to an end during the Napoleonic Wars. And this is also ratified on April 13th, 2 days later, by Napoleon Bonaparte. And with that comes his exile to the Isle of Elba. So he's there for a while, eventually escapes the island, goes back to France, runs into Paris, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, he's back. Thank God. Let's go back to fighting. And that lasts for a little while until the Battle of Waterloo, the famous Battle of Waterloo, and everything comes crashing down. And then he is exiled for the second time and for the last time, and he dies at St. Helena or Helena? How do you say it?
I don't.
Exactly.
But it's in the Atlantic, somewhere between
It's
Africa.
out there.
Yeah, it's between Africa and South America, just south of the equator, if I'm not mistaken.
And you probably
Not that I've
aren't.
been
You
there
rarely
lately,
are. That's what I love. That's what I've learned over the years doing the show with you is to never question you ever while we're recording. And when we're not recording, question you at all times. All right.
That's
well,
my favorite type of macaroni, the
Elba.
Melba macaroni. I
Elba.
love that.
That's
You
right.
know, that's how the whole. Have you read the book, The Count of Monte Cristo?
No, but I've seen the movie.
Oh, okay, well, you should read the book. It's pretty good. But
I
that's why Edmond Dante,
Mhm.
Dante's, whatever.
Dantes. Yes.
Dantes. That's why
He's
he was
exiled, kicked
thrown in
out.
prison
Yeah.
at the Chateau d'If or
Uh-huh.
d'If or d'If, because they suspected Bonapartist. You know. Anyway,
Got to
so,
get rid of them.
Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that is This Week in History.
So we have a couple of guests today that wrote a book about our favorite Uncle Joe,
Yeah.
Stalin. He doesn't get enough credit for all the massacres and death and destruction for the World War II. He's portrayed as the good guy, but he was a bit of same ass as Hitler was, pretty much.
The current Uncle Joe is not getting enough credit for all the mayhem that's being caused either.
Well, that's.
But in
We don't
his
remember,
defense, he
yeah.
has no idea that he's even in charge of anything.
No.
So, Uncle Joe. We're going to be talking about Uncle Joe, the man with the great mustache,
Yeah.
and the devil in disguise. Actually, not a great disguise, except for the mustache and the great slicked back hair.
You think I'd look? No.
Maybe, if it's thick enough.
You think?
Yeah, I would try it.
Maybe I should ask Laura.
Yeah.
She would.
See what she would.
Yeah.
Maybe. Doubtful.
You know.
Highly.
Yeah, should we mention
Questionable.
that we have an audience member?
We
for
do
the
have an
thing?
audience.
We have our
Yeah.
first audience member. She's
Uh-huh.
sitting somewhere down there.
You can
but-
yell hello if you wish. Okay, there we go. Oh, isn't that lovely? All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got wow, that John is a tough name to say. John O'Neill. We've got John O'Neill who's going to be joining us. And speaking of people in the background, Sarah Wynn, I believe, is going to be with him.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that she's going to be like up front.
Well, you know what they say about every successful man.
Yeah, is a
His
lady.
mom is going to beat his ass.
Exactly, as a lady forcing him to get to work. So, John O'Neill is the co author of The Dancer and the Devil, along with Sarah Wynn. He is also the author of The Fisherman's Tomb and the New York Times best-selling book, Unfit for Command, about your old pal, John Kerry.
John F. Kerry.
F.
Very,
Kerry.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Put that F in there.
Out of Massachusetts, senator.
Yeah. What a
Who,
fantastic.
by the way, was in the exact same fraternity as George W. Bush.
Yeah.
And they were there at the same time, and they were both the candidates in 2004 for a president.
Wild
Yeah.
stuff.
What are the odds?
Speaking of wild stuff, we've got John O'Neill, saying it properly and correctly. John O'Neill on the line. John, how are you doing?
It's good to be here. I'm honored to be on your podcast, Dustin.
Hey, you got it. We're honored to have you, and we're looking forward to this conversation. We discuss Stalin for sure quite often, and so it's going to be pretty cool.
And we'll talk about Putin too. So, but before we get into all that, I do want to ask you a couple of events have occurred in the Soviet Union, such as there was a bubonic plague came out. I think it was in '39. The towns or the cities of, and I know I'm going to butcher the name, Yekaterinburg, and then in Kiev, where there was either it was suspected or confirmed that something was released, some kind of biological agent, similar to Wuhan right now with the COVID-19. So, what's your thoughts on all that?
That's exactly what happened. The great source is a guy named Kenneth Albeck. Albeck was the head of the Soviet bioweapons program. He was number two throughout the 1970s and 80s. He defected and he wrote a book called Biohazards. And what actually happened is in 1972, anthrax escaped into the sanitary sewer system of Kiev for the first time. It matured through rats and stuff into a form of anthrax called anthrax 638 in Yekaterinburg out in the Urals, the very same place that the Romanovs had been killed. In 1979, exactly the same thing occurred, a second escape of anthrax. It killed over 1,000 people. The Soviets claimed that it was due to tainted meat, and they shot dogs and they tried 2 butchers for selling tainted meat. But as Albeck discloses, they actually call it the biowar Chernobyl. It was a leak of anthrax, and it got into the water and sanitary sewer systems. It killed 1,000 people.
Now, what are your thoughts on Wuhan and the present COVID-19? That's because I suspect, although I don't have the proof, because I'm not a biologist or a scientist or anything of that sort, but even Jon Stewart, who's he's even saying, come on, guys, we know that Wuhan released something into the air. So It just seems to be a pattern with the communist movements.
I think that Jon Stewart said, if you go to Hershey, Pennsylvania, and you see chocolate go on the street, it ain't from a cocoa bean immigrated from Brazil. And he's exactly right. The first thing to understand about communist China is they have the largest and most sophisticated bioweapons program on earth. They have 14 different labs, including a huge bioweapons lab, not a biolab, not a lab to study diseases, a lab to weaponize viruses and bacteria. They have a huge one in Wuhan. These are listed in appendix to the book that the US government put out years ago. So Wuhan, where the virus appeared, is it's a site of tremendous bioweapons. The guy who discovered it in Wuhan was a doctor, Dr. Li. He was arrested for disclosing state secrets when he disclosed the outbreak on the internet. And then he died shortly thereafter, supposedly of the disease, although it kills in less than 1.5% of the cases. The virus itself, I'll call it the Wuhan virus, the COVID-19 virus, is 96% exactly the same as a virus that was transported from a cave in the Himalayas to the virology lab at Wuhan back in 2015. 4% is different. 4% has never been found anywhere in nature. There is incredible evidence that what they did is take the bat virus that was discovered, brought to the Wuhan lab, moved it to the military lab, and then used CRISPR and other tools to edit it, to add things like a proton hook to make it more communicable. I personally believe they were in the process of conducting vaccine tests and it escaped, but how it got released, I don't know. I need to tell you, though, it's really important about the 1977 virus that escaped in China, which has become known now. In 1955, the whole world got a virus out of, it was called the Asian virus, out of China. Okay, that happens. Well, what happened in 1977 is another virus, the 1977 flu virus, went all the way around the world. And what puzzled people is the 77 virus was exactly the same as the 55 virus. This is like Dustin 40 years ago being Dustin today. It can't happen. Viruses mutate, particularly flu viruses mutate. So people said, wait a second, someone took the 55 virus and they preserved it in their lab in China. China said, no, not us. We don't know anything about that. In 1994, the head of their virology program, and cited many medical journal articles, came out and said, hey, fellas, yeah, it was us. We took the 1955 virus, we had it in storage, and in 1977, we were running vaccine tests with our military, and it just escaped and got out. And that's how the 77 virus traveled all the way around the world. Now, the only reason you run vaccine tests on a virus that exists only in cold storage in your laboratory is to develop a debilitating biological weapon. There's no other reason to do it. And China's loaded to the gills with 14 of these laboratories doing this.
Yeah, I have a hard time trusting the Maoists and the Stalinists and the communists. I mean, call me naive, but yeah.
Well, speaking of now, yeah, tell me about that one. Everybody who's studied history knows who Joseph Stalin was, but who is Anna Pavlova?
Anna Pavlova was history's greatest dancer. In 1900, she first began to become famous. She was thin, she was small. They rejected her when she started off, but she could express emotion greater than anybody. People said she flew. And a lot of the great Russian ballets were designed for her. And her most famous was the Dying Swan. In 1904, she became very famous at the Imperial Ballet. She actually went out and protested against the Tsar, so she wasn't approved. In 1911, she formed her own company, began going all over the world. She danced in, for example, in Mexico City. Villa and Zapata said, we'll kill you if you go to Mexico City. She danced at the Plaza de los Toros, the bull ring in Mexico City in front of 32,000, and she invented the national dance of Mexico. She was the most famous international star in the world, roughly circa 1920, 1925, 1930. She did one movie and only one, although Hollywood kept trying to re-sign her. The New Yorker picked that out as the greatest one-time performance ever by an actor. It was called The Dumb Girl of Puccini. She was to the world Russia, and she still to this day is the greatest of all ballerinas. She inspired Audrey Hepburn. There are 37 biographies of her. She is the grande dame of all ballet.
Well, you mentioned Mexico City. 1940, wasn't Trotsky murdered with a special lead poisoning? You know, ice pick.
He was actually he was murdered on Stalin's orders, and the guy who organized it was part of the Yasha Ring in Paris. His name was Nahum Eidinger. He was called Stalin's Secret Sword. He was married to not married. He was accompanied by a woman named Miska, who was incredibly beautiful and who operated with him. He's the guy who got the Spanish assassin to go to Mexico City. The guy actually got a ice pick and drove it through Trotsky's eye, and that's how Trotsky was killed in Mexico City.
Yeah, all he wanted was a drink, and he got one right into the eye. Now, how does Anna Pavlova's her rise to fame and then her tragic death sort of exemplify the change from imperialist Russia to communist Russia?
Well, what really happened, first of all, Stalin started a poison lab in 1921 called Lab 1. It's how all these biological weapons all began. There was you mentioned the leak at Gothenburg. There was an earlier leak at Saratov in 1939. What happened is the guy who was in charge of the Saratov Bio War Project came to Moscow at Stalin's request. He stayed at the Hotel Nacional and he began coughing. A doctor went to the Hotel Nacional and he said, "My God," the guy's name was Berlin. "My God, Berlin, you've got pneumonic plague. We haven't seen pneumonic plague here in 300 years." Well, everybody died who was exposed to pneumonic plague, but he was within a few hours of communicating it to the entire leadership of the Soviet Union. The only way that story became known were brave people in Russia smuggling that story out. And so that was one of many. But what she did, the reason Stalin hated her so much is, of course, the Russian ballets were typically, the Nutcracker. They're all about royalty and happy times and Swan Lake with the Dark Prince and so on. And Stalin's message was to destroy the past. He who they said in the Soviet Union, we know what the future is. We just have to keep relearning the past. And so his idea was to control totally ballet and the arts. He said that, for example, the word God, it became illegal to use the word God in Russia. And he said it would never be used again after 1935. So he controlled language, he controlled completely the arts. He had this little ballerina dancing free all over the world as the face of Russia. That was exactly what Stalin couldn't take and couldn't tolerate. And that's why he had to kill her. Of course, Russian ballet suffered terribly. Stalin sat in the Bolshoi. The great center of Russian ballet had been at the Mariinsky in St. Petersburg. Well, to the degree there was a center, it moved to the Bolshoi, and he would actually execute. The book outlines some of the people he caused to be executed because he didn't like what they were doing. In 1924, a guy brought back the old Russian ballets. He was executed. It was a reign of terror, even in ballet, even in a thing as simple as ballet.
So you highlight in the book the creation of these poison labs under Stalin. What's the correlation between those labs and the current regime under Putin?
What happened is in 1972, the Soviet Union and all other nations in the world signed what's called the Biological Warfare Convention, outlawing all biological warfare. What happened in the Soviet Union is it was a start button, not a stop button. And they launched a program called Project Enzyme. That was the biggest bio-war project in history. They were spending more money on it than they were spending on nuclear weapons by the late 1970s. Meanwhile, everybody else disarmed. The same sort of advanced program occurred in China. China began huge biological warfare labs and so on to investigate this. They called them special weapons. The theory was that there was a nuclear stalemate. You couldn't launch nuclear weapons on someone else, you'd catch them back, but you could develop special weapons that couldn't be detected. And maybe that's how you could actually project power. And so Project Enzyme went forward under Gorbachev and under Yeltsin. They were to some degree abandoned. And then they took off in spades again under Putin. So you had things occurring like in 2012 in the presidential debate in Russia. Putin's communist adversary said, "You've let the army go to pieces." And Putin said, "That's because you don't know about our genetic weapons." You have occurrences in the Soviet Union like Ebola breaking out in Siberia. Ebola is a tropical disease. And you've had other defectors out of the Soviet Union. In China, exactly the same sort of stuff has happened. I told you about the 1977 flu epidemic. These are terrifying, horrible weapons. If you take a thing like COVID-19, it's mutating very rapidly. We don't actually know what the end game is. It doesn't seem to be operating in the same way as a natural virus. Typically, a natural virus gets more communicable, but less deadly. This one is mutating very quickly and erratically, and making it difficult to immunize against and vaccinate against. And so this is a terrible thing for the world. And we've actually just got to wipe these out. we've got to get off of this game. It's a self-defeating, crazy thing like nuclear weapons.
Now, speaking of correlations, and the Stalin Putin correlation, Stalin, as you mentioned in the book, and as historians the world over have made very clear, he and Mao were the great butchers of the world, of world history. Putin is former KGB. He now is over the Russian Federation. But what's the exact correlation between Stalin and Putin? Because myself, I mean, it's hard to put them on the same level because Stalin was such a demonic, diabolical figure. So what's the correlation?
Well, first you need to understand that Putin's grandfather was Stalin's cook and taster. Putin's father was an exterminator for the KGB. His job was to follow the Red Army through the Ukraine and to shoot people in the back of the head who were politically unreliable or who they thought had collaborated with the Nazis. So when Putin speaks about we need a denazification of the Ukraine, he's a chip off the old family block. Putin has said that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the most terrible event, the saddest event in human history. Putin's mentor in his early days, Putin, by the way, has never been in war. Putin avoided the Afghan war by staying in East Germany, very safe, as Stalin avoided all war. He's much better at sending people to war than actually fighting himself. In any event, Putin's mentor was a guy named Slobodak, and Slobodak was the mayor of Leningrad, later St. Petersburg, and Putin was the vice mayor. Well, Putin leaped up and became the prime minister of Russia. And right after he became prime minister, they asked Slobodak, tell us about Putin. Who is Putin? And he said, Putin is the new Stalin. Putin is the new Stalin. 2 days later, Slobodak died of a heart attack, and both of his bodyguards had simultaneous heart attacks at exactly the same time. This is a guy who starts exactly like Stalin did with retail poisoning, and he moves into mass poisonings later on. Stalin began by poisoning people like Tikhon, head of the Russian Orthodox Church, and Dzynsky, who was the head of the KGB, and likely Lenin, as our book outlines. A lot of scholars believe now that Stalin actually poisoned Lenin. And so he began as a retail poisoner and then moved into a slaughter of human beings. It's exactly the same pattern that our friend Putin is following right now. He poisoned person after person on sort of a retail basis. And now I was this is the morning paper today, on the slaughter occurring in Bucha in the Ukraine. And so you're watching exactly the same pattern as Stalin. Stalin, of course, and Putin has been clear, he believes that Stalin is his hero.
Wow.
Wasn't Stalin murdered, possibly poisoned?
He was, and it's outlined in the book. It's really very, very interesting. Stalin, according to Professor Jonathan Brandt of Yale University, got actually access to Stalin's archives in the early 1990s. Stalin was actually in the process of preparing for a nuclear strike on the West, a first strike on the West. We'd all be living kind of in ashes if Stalin had managed to complete his dreams. And he calculated and determined that Russia would lose maybe 20 or 30 million, but less than World War II. And he would then be in control of the world. Well, his underlings, particularly a guy named Beria, didn't like that at all, nor did Khrushchev and Molotov. They thought it was sort of crazy. And so Stalin prepared a purge. A purge with Stalin always started by cutting out the underling guys and then moving up to the top guys. So Beria's underling guy went to jail. Khrushchev's underling guy went to jail. The problem is, much like Putin, Stalin had tasters. Stalin was surrounded by 300 bodyguards. What could you do with Stalin? Well, the solution, and the documents here, great thanks to Professor Brandt and some autobiographies. The solution was a poison called warfarin. Warfarin is a is a blood thinner. It's used now for people with blood clotting problems in very small amounts. But what warfarin causes is stomach bleeding. And so you slowly bleed to death in your stomach and you don't even know there's anything wrong. And so if there's a taster, the taster gets a little bit, he goes off, he's fine. But a cumulative dose of warfarin is what killed Stalin. Stalin's autopsy was put out and it deleted the actual cause of death. What Professor Brent found was the actual original autopsy, which shows massive stomach bleeding. Later, both the Khrushchev autobiography and the Molotov autobiography, published in the 1990s, said that Beria, who was arrested 6 months later, tried and executed, Beria kept saying, "You can't do something to me. I saved your lives. I killed Stalin." So there's abundant evidence that Stalin actually was murdered. Now, as to the actual facts of his death, as he died, the best authority is his daughter Svetlina. And Svetlina actually observed her father's death. He was sort of semi-conscious, if you can believe this. Beria was applying leeches, 18th century leeches to Stalin, supposedly to help him. Now, the guy's bleeding to death in the stomach, but at any rate, he was semi-conscious. And right before he died, he sat up, began screaming, waving his hands, and then he collapsed and died. Svetlina thought that he was actually watching the angel of death come to haul him off. And indeed, if there was anybody that deserved to be hauled off, it would definitely have been Stalin.
This kind of reminds me of a story, and I don't know if it was ever confirmed, but Napoleon Bonaparte. People say that he looked preserved when they unburied him, and they think that maybe he had arsenic poisoning.
Absolutely. They've always thought there have been great, I'm no expert on, but I have read the articles and so on that claim that the British, the claim is that the British poisoned him with arsenic. Of course, there were a lot of medicines with arsenic in those days.
Huh. Well, I wouldn't want to be the president of Ukraine right now or his family.
Yeah. And you keep irritating me, you will wind up with some stomach
Didn't you
bleeding.
serve me some tea earlier today that just kind of tasted funny?
It tasted weird for a
Yeah,
very whatever.
Feeling a little bit
already?
of
yeah, 210.
yeah.
Well, John,
Anyway.
hey, this was a fascinating conversation. Your book, The Devil and the Dancer, is just a fascinating read. Thank you so much for you and Sarah Wynn, your co-author. I believe she's somewhere around.
I'm here. Thank you for letting us participate.
You're welcome.
Sarah is the one who knows every single, if you guys had asked me, how do we know such and such was poisoned, Sarah could tell you. She read the trial transcript in 1938 of Miranovsky, of whoever it was, 1955 in the case of Miranovsky. Miranovsky was the guy that ran Laboratory One, who killed people like the Wallenberg, the missing man of history, the guy that saved so many Jews, who Miranovsky used as a test rabbit in 1947 and executed in Laboratory One, killed him with a poison called C4, trying to make it useful for poisoning people. Sarah's the one who knows all of that.
But he's being kind, but there's a place you can learn lots. It's our website, www.danceranddevil.com. And we've got photos there to, supplement all John has talked about, and lots more information about the book. And you can pre-order signed copies there. So if you have any questions, you can head to our website.
Guys, what you would really enjoy doing, there's you can go right on the web and find the Russians had what was called the AP journal. The bioweapons project in Russia back in the Soviet era and Stalin's era was called the anti-plague project. That was all a cover for developing things like anthrax. But the people who participated in it amazingly have a journal that's sort of like, an old military. You were in the 101st, you remember in France, the 101st. They actually have a journal exactly like that. And they described killing the dogs, for example, in 1979 at a Kottenberg. I noticed that. It's sort of amazing. And they say, it's wonderful we have this journal, because if we didn't have it, why, no one would know what we did. Everybody would forget. So it's a strange sociopath exercise. I mean, how are you a poisoner? How do you develop bioweapons? How do you live with yourself doing something like that?
Go
I
ahead.
actually have one more question. But before I ask that one, the Hungarian person, by any chance, was that the Swedish diplomat that was in Hungary?
Yes, he was. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat in Hungary in 1944, and he went out and passed out with no authorization Swedish passports to almost 80,000 Jews. And he rented big areas and said, this is the Swedish library, this is this. He even got people off the train to Auschwitz. He saved 80,000, including a couple of congressmen, people who ended up becoming congressmen when they grew up. Well, he was picked up in 1945 by the Soviets. And then for 50 years, people said, where's Wallenberg? Reagan gave a great speech at the United Nations ending up, where's Wallenberg? Well, the truth of what happened to Wallenberg became known in the 1990s. What happened to Wallenberg is he was in fact picked up. The Russians had some hope of trading him for agents or for somebody else, and he didn't. So they sent him to their poison lab, and I guess you've lost me, huh?
No, you're good.
You've still got me. Well, they actually sent him to their poison lab in 1947, and he was used as a test subject for poisons. And that was confirmed by the Soviet Union in the 1990s, but they still refused to produce for the Wallenberg family. He has a brother who's 98 years old. They still refused to give him the actual test records and the actual interrogations of Wallenberg, I guess because his death was so terrible. They don't want people to realize how horrible it was.
Yeah, he became recently, I believe it was recently, an honorary American citizen with Lafayette and Galvez and all that. But
He was in Budapest. There's a fabulous Wallenberg statue. The Russians forced the people of Hungary to make a statue as a matter of treaty, thanking the Russians for taking over Hungary. And the Hungarians have surrounded it with shrubbery, so you can't see the Russian statue anymore. They leave it there, but you would have a very hard time finding it in Budapest. And then outside of it and close to it is the statue of Wallenberg. So Wallenberg lives on in history, even if they killed him in that lab.
now my last question, and I'm having this discussion made me want to ask you this. George Patton, my hero. Stories, he was recovering from his accident in December of 45 and then took a nosedive.
And I just don't have information on that. I mean, any suspicious poisoning, you have to look into completely, but I don't know. I didn't run into him in the course of the research we did. So I can't, I do believe that the Soviets used poisons and biological warfare on the Germans. I know, for example, that they got a lot of the physicians at Auschwitz, moved them to Laboratory 1 and debriefed them, getting all the hints that they could get. And then they used them as test subjects. They actually, probably good riddance to them, they used them as to test poisons on. But as to Patton, I didn't run across him in the research. Did you?
Nor did I.
No.
So my last question, and it doesn't have anything to do with the book. I thought this was what you were going to ask, because you were talking about the correlation of how Putin is sort of walking in the footsteps of Stalin, and you're talking about poisoning, creating poisons, and the journal about the dogs and different things like that. And we have sort of a situation with our very own, like Dr. Fauci with the NIH and the things that they're doing to animals as well. Just some really sick stuff. Do you see anybody following in some really weird footsteps here in the U.S.?
I gotta say, I was oblivious to all of this until I got into this whole subject matter. I'm horrified by the treatment of animals in testing by Big Pharma, by the NIH, and so on. I guess it's somebody else's cause, but it is horrifying. In Laboratory 1, they actually tried to produce. They took women and they actually implanted chimpanzee embryos in them to try and produce a mutant species. And of course, they concluded that animal testing didn't give them good enough results in terms of poisons, the toxicity of poisons. So they moved into actually using real people. But the treatment of animals is horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And but in here at least, I think we all think that people are important, that that we care for one another. At least I hope we all do. You sadly are dealing, when you deal with Putin's Russia or China, you're dealing with the deal where those are human beings, even are just human material, and so animals are irrelevant. As a matter of fact, dogs were outlawed in China until fairly recently. You couldn't have a dog.
That's what happens when you play God. You're gonna
Yeah. You play God, you turn into the devil. Hey, John, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and just thank you again.
Thank you all. I've really enjoyed your questions and enjoyed your podcast too.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And if some Russian guy hands you a cup of tea, just politely decline. And
Well, I'm at 76. They're only taking away 3 or 4 years, so it's okay. It's okay. It's in the game. But thank you all very much, and good luck to you.
I that was pretty enlightening, which makes me wonder about this tea.
I would wonder about it too if I were you.
You said this is a Russian blend?
Yeah, I'm not concerned. I don't drink it.
Okay, well, if something happens,
Yeah, everybody will know.
But you know what? Let's talk about the guest that we just had. That was it's pretty scary to sit and think that the way we can fight wars. Although the whole thing with Ukraine kind of puzzles me a bit because he's fighting it. Russia, Putin is fighting it in a very conventional manner, but he probably could have done the same damage, gotten rid of the Nazis, as he likes to put it, using some kind of a biological agent or something. So they have been doing it. They've poisoned many people. The whole polonium 210 thing is real well known. And we had that critic, the reporter who he was a critic of Putin. He died in London.
Yeah.
And throughout history, and the things that he was saying were
that's what's frightening
agents.
to me, is that he was lining up how Stalin started to how Putin has started. It's.
I mean, you can fight a war with a biological agent and wipe out your enemy before
they even know that you've started a fight. Yeah, that's what's scary.
George Washington, he made sure that his soldiers were all inoculated with smallpox. Because he knew that smallpox could defeat the revolutionary, could defeat them in the Revolutionary War. Just little tiny agents.
That's all it takes.
But I didn't realize the extent to what the Soviet Union and even Russia. I had a feeling about China, but he mentioned some of the things about what Red China was doing. So it's not a good thing to see. What it is that they're trying to do and how they can win a war without even shooting a.
And what really irritates me is the naivete of people in power, or the pretended naivete, where if you, like what John was saying, they captured the 1955 virus and used it again 22 years later, the exact same one, right? Well, now that this is taking place, and he was saying 96% of the virus that was found in that cave, and then moving it in and then utilizing it 5 years later, and people were like, oh no, it's just from people eating bats and stuff. Like, what kind of BS are you just ingesting? Like, stop. There are bad people in this world, that have zero power, and then there are bad people who have a lot of power. Well, guess what? The people in power in China and the people in power in Russia, not good people.
What frightens me is, the things, and I'm glad you mentioned Anthony Fauci. He's pretty much the documents that are coming out. The whole gain of function gain of function. That's where he's saying, no, we didn't do gain of function.
Yeah.
Well, he's saying that because that's his interpretation of gain
Yeah.
of function. But everyone who's in science knows what gain of function research is, and that's exactly what Wuhan is doing. We've been partially funding it,
Right.
and the media, our government, many people in our government, they don't want to find out where this virus came from. They just shut up. We're going to, you have an account on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah.
We're going to shut
gonna
it
shut
down
it down.
because you're giving out disinformation.
So hopefully Elon Musk can have something to do with that as far as like
I was happy.
reinstating some of the stuff. So that's
and I hope that
hopefully it's a huge plus.
Well, I hope that they're, I know Dr. Rand Paul, as senator, is really trying hard to get the information out because if this type of research is going on and we can confirm that the Wuhan virus, aka COVID-19, actually came from the Wuhan lab, then that means that they are indeed tweaking with the virus to make it more lethal.
And I'm not going to say that that's an act of war, but that's an act of war.
Yeah, that is an act of war.
So, all right, well, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to our book and movie recommendations. Now, I say that because you and I could probably go on for the next 30 to 45 minutes discussing all of this insanity that's going on, but maybe for a time where it's just you and I. Just you and I, sharing our love together. Ooh, man, I hit that high part real well. All right, well, book and movie recommendation. Book recommendation, obviously, is The Devil and the Dancer. I think it's a very important book to read because it takes you from, turn of the 20th century up to more or less today with like Putin, Xi, and, your buddy over at North Korea. So, yeah, fantastic book. I think that's unanimous, unanimous.
Yeah.
Between you and I. My movie recommendation, I know I've recommended it before, but it is a great film. It's a dark comedy, very dark comedy. The Death of Stalin. If you've not watched this movie, I will also reiterate Mr. Jones, too. But The Death of Stalin, fantastic film, very funny, such a dark comedy that it is like, yeah, this is probably how it was in real life, because all that's taking place is really more or less how it happened, but with a lot of dark humor dialogue in it. So go check that movie if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna recommend the same book, The Devil and the Dancer. Yes, it is unanimous. So, I think that maybe certain senators need to read that book also.
Yeah.
Because and that's going to lead into my movie of the week, movie recommendation is that. And what's his name? Dr. Jordan Peterson mentioned.
You're going to say Dr. Zhivago.
Well, no, I'm going to mention that. Dr. Jordan Peterson was talking about how everybody knows about the Holocaust. Everybody knows about the concentration camps. But how many people know about the gulags?
Exactly.
It's if Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
I've been saying that for a long time.
Yeah, they're just
I posted that about a year ago, maybe a little more. I was like, parents, ask your kids who are in school if they know about the Nazi concentration camps, and then ask them if they know about the Gulag.
Yeah. Poland was invaded by 3 countries, Germany, Slovakia, and the Soviet Union. No one talks about Slovakia, but no one talks about the Soviet Union either. Yeah. And, and then they didn't stop there. They took over the 3 Baltic nations, which is why they don't trust the Russians. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which is why they became members of NATO. They invaded Finland. There was the Winter War was fought there. They invaded.
Which proved the Finnish know how to freaking fight.
Yeah, I wouldn't mess with them. Not in the snow, at least. They invaded eastern Romania, which today is known as Moldova or something like that.
I like how you said that.
Moldova?
Romania.
Romania, yeah.
Molva? Eastern Romania.
It's a Molva.
You sounded like Audrey Hepburn from My Fair Lady. Did you ever see that movie?
No.
Anyways.
No. I've seen Breakfast at Tiffany's.
There you go.
Which I was going to name Breakfast at Debbie Gibson's. But,
Breakfast at Debbie Gibson.
Yeah. Truman Capote wasn't there to back me up on that one. So
no.
Anyway, all right. So my leading to my movie, and the reason why I'm going to talk about this is that there are not there's a lot of movies about Germany, the Nazis, but there's other than okay, and that's where I'm going to go to Dr. Zhivago. Dr. Zhivago is my recommendation because there are no, or at least, and there are very few movies that show the communists, the Russians, the Soviets as bad people. You got Red Dawn, yes,
Right.
but Dr. Zhivago shows, you have Omar Sharif, Julie Christie, you have Rod Steiger, and one of my favorite all-time actors, Sir Alec Guinness. That's right.
I love that
Love
guy.
Sir Alec, Ben Kenobi, and that guy in Bridge on.
George,
He was Bridge on the River Kwai. He was on
George
Lawrence of Arabia.
Smiley.
Lawrence of Arabia.
He was George Smiley.
Was it? Yes, yeah, I believe so. But it's funny that David Lean, the guy who did Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia, also directed Dr. Zhivago. Could have won Best Picture, but The Sound of Music beat them that year. Yeah, The Sound of Music was a little bit more upbeat. Dr. Zhivago, but Dr. Zhivago, watch it. It's
Where was
good,
it?
huh? Yeah.
Anti-communist, anti-Nazi. Who wins?
Oh, that's true. That's
Think
true.
about
But
it.
also,
hey, they both deserve to be shunned by humanity.
but Dr.
so
Zhivago was cold and bleak, whereas
it
the,
was
you know,
very depressing.
but
Wow.
Sound of Music was like upbeat, and
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, Dr. Zhivago, watch it. You'll like it. It is long. Great music.
Great acting.
Yeah, great acting.
Great storyline. Yeah, just
great
fantastic
story.
movie.
So the scene where
classics.
that Russian officer was trying to talk to the lads. The Germans are right over there, and then they kill him. It's pretty. Did you see that scene?
I saw it. I had to have.
Yeah,
I saw the whole movie.
yeah. But yeah, it was kind of like, guys, we're being invaded. But they're like, kill him.
Yeah, because we're done fighting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
sick. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this episode. We hope that you and Laura enjoyed everything that we've put together on this one. But you need to come hang out with us. You need to like our stuff, comment. Now, if you try to troll us, we will strike back, as
Well-
we have done.
We'll give you some.
Hey,
We'll give you some tea with.
watch it.
Yeah, Alec Baldwin's face.
Russian blend.
Yeah,
All right, so
the
where
new
can
Russian.
people find us, my friend?
Well, they can find us on Facebook, like us, Instagram, follow us, YouTube, subscribe, and we're on Rumble also.
Rumble, yeah.
And finally, we have our very own website, www.thesonsofhistory.com, where are we going to serve the new polonium tea that you...
Oh, yeah. You can buy it in bulk.
Okay, all right.
Ship it right
It's
back.
Putin recommended.
Shoot it right, send it right back to Moscow. And if you are listening on a podcast, do us a huge favor and subscribe. Then also leave us a rating and review, preferably 5 stars, and a glowing review. And that is it for this episode. We'll talk to you later.